Emily had been counting down the minutes all day, staring at the clock at work, willing it to move faster, because the week had been endless. Meetings piled on top of emails, phone calls she didn't want, deadlines she barely met, and the kind of exhaustion that made your bones ache. By the time she stepped out of the office, the streets were quiet, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement from the rain earlier, and she felt a small flicker of relief, imagining the peace of her apartment, her couch, and maybe a warm cup of tea while she let the day fade away. She unlocked her door, her keys jangling, expecting the familiar smell of her own space, the soft hum of her heater, and perhaps the faint sound of music from the neighbors' apartments, and then everything froze. There, slouched across her couch with a bottle of wine in his hand and his head leaning slightly to the side, was Liam, her neighbor, the one she had always exchanged polite smiles and occasional hellos with but never really spent time with, and seeing him there, unsteady, flushed, and vulnerable, made her heart skip in a way she hadn't expected. "Emily, hi," he mumbled, his voice low and a little shaky, and she noticed the nervousness, the embarrassment in the way he tried to smile, the awkward tilt of his body as he realized he had been caught in her living room. The thought raced through her mind. Why was he here? Why her apartment? And most importantly, why like this? She had seen him in passing, laughing with friends, confident, charming, but never like this, sitting there with his shoulders slumped and a bottle that looked like it had been half empty long before he arrived, and a strange mix of worry and curiosity washed over her. Part of her wanted to yell, to demand an explanation, but another part, the softer part, the part that had always felt a little flutter when he smiled at her in the hallway, wanted to just sit and understand, to help somehow, even if it was awkward and uncomfortable. She stepped inside fully, letting the door click shut behind her, and for a moment, they just looked at each other, silence stretching, thick and heavy, but not angry, more uncertain, charged with a strange intimacy that surprised her. He tried to stand, swaying slightly, and she instinctively reached out, steadying him, feeling the warmth of his hand, the tension of embarrassment and shame in the way he avoided her gaze. I didn't mean to," he started, but his words stumbled, caught in his own confusion and maybe the drink, and Emily realized that he wasn't a threat, that this wasn't some reckless act of intrusion, but something else entirely, something fragile and human, the kind of thing you only saw when someone let their guard down completely. She guided him to sit back down, offered a glass of water, and tried to keep her voice calm, soothing, though her own heart was beating faster than usual. "Why are you here, Liam?" she asked softly, not accusing, just curious, her concern clear, and he looked down, ashamed, and muttered something about needing a place to think, to escape, and to feel less alone, and in that moment, Emily saw a side of him she had never seen before, a vulnerability that made him seem smaller, more real, and somehow, in that strange, unexpected way, even more magnetic. She noticed the way his hands trembled slightly, the faint redness on his cheeks, the uncertain glances at the furniture, the space he clearly knew wasn't his, and yet, despite the shock, she felt a pull toward him, a desire to be the one to steady him, to offer comfort, even though she barely understood the situation. He laughed weakly at something she said, a little embarrassed, and she realized he wasn't drunk in the reckless, obnoxious way people often were. He was unmoored, fragile, and seeking connection, even if he hadn't known how to ask for it properly. Emily sank into her own chair across from him, leaning forward slightly, watching him struggle with his own words, and she felt that familiar flutter in her chest, the one that always appeared when something about him touched the softer, more tender parts of her heart that she rarely let anyone see. Time seemed to stretch strangely, the city outside muted by the walls, the faint hum of traffic far below, and for a moment, everything else faded, leaving just the two of them in that quiet apartment, a space that had been ordinary and safe moments ago but now felt alive, electric, and charged with possibilities that neither of them had planned. She didn't push him to leave, didn't scold him, didn't let panic take over, because she realized that this wasn't about boundaries or rules. It was about humanity, about connection, about being there when someone allowed themselves to be vulnerable in front of you, and Emily, for reasons she didn't fully understand herself, wanted to be that person for him. He finally looked up, his eyes searching hers, filled with something raw, unguarded, a mixture of apology and need, and she found herself responding with the kind of gentle patience she had always wished for in her own moments of weakness, a quiet acceptance that spoke louder than words. The room smelled faintly of wine, of the city night, and maybe a little of his cologne, familiar from hallway encounters, and Emily realized that something significant had shifted in the space between them. It wasn't romantic yet, not fully, but the seed had been planted, in the way he had let his walls fall, in the way she had held her own judgment aside, in the subtle electricity that danced in the pauses between their words. She guided him to the couch fully, offered him another glass of water, and sat down nearby, close enough to offer comfort but not so close as to overwhelm, and the air hummed with an unspoken tension, the kind that makes hearts race and minds wander into possibilities they weren't ready to admit. Emily's thoughts spun. He was charming, difficult, human, messy, and somehow, in this very ordinary apartment on a very ordinary night, he was suddenly the center of her world. The night stretched on, and neither of them moved much, their conversation tentative, fragments of stories and laughs mixing with moments of silence, and Emily felt a strange comfort in the fact that she was witnessing this side of him, a version she had never seen, and part of her wanted to hold onto it, to savor it, because it was rare, real, and unpolished. She wondered how she had never noticed this before, how she had been so close to someone she admired and maybe liked without ever realizing the depth hidden behind casual smiles and polite hellos. And as Liam finally leaned back, exhausted, his voice quiet, a little embarrassed, Emily felt something stir in her chest that went beyond concern. It was the start of recognition, the start of emotional intimacy, the first flicker of something that could grow into more, all triggered by this night, this unexpected intrusion, and this fragile, human man in her living room. She realized that nothing would be the same after this, that the apartment had become a space for honesty, for vulnerability, for the possibility of connection, and that even though the night was messy and uncertain, it was real, and for Emily, that mattered more than anything. Liam shifted uneasily on the couch, the faint wobble of his body betraying the drink he had taken earlier, and Emily could feel a strange mix of sympathy and curiosity rise within her as she handed him the glass of water. Her fingers brushing his briefly, sending a small shiver up her spine that made her heart skip in a way she wasn't expecting, because even though she had known him for years as the polite neighbor, this side of him, the side that was fragile, unguarded, and human, was entirely new, and it made her see him differently, more deeply, like seeing a familiar painting but finally noticing the tiny details that made it extraordinary. He took the glass with a hesitant hand, eyes flickering toward her with a mixture of embarrassment and relief, and as he sipped slowly, she watched him. Noticing the tension in his shoulders, the faint tremble in his fingers, the way his gaze sometimes wandered to the floor or the empty spaces around the apartment, as though he were unsure if he belonged there or even deserved to be in someone else's world for a moment. I needed to get out of my own apartment, he admitted softly, the words catching slightly in his throat, and Emily leaned forward instinctively, giving him space but showing him she was listening, because sometimes, the best comfort is just knowing someone is paying attention, really paying attention, and in the quiet that followed, she felt the city's noise fade away, the lights from outside reflecting dimly on the walls, creating a small world that existed only for the two of them, one where the usual rules and pretenses didn't apply. She asked gently, "Why here?" and he shrugged, a weak smile flickering on his lips, not because he was happy but because he wanted to hide the awkwardness and vulnerability, though it only made him more human, more relatable, more real, and Emily realized that the charm she had always noticed in him wasn't just in his jokes or the confident way he walked down the hallway. It was in these fleeting moments of honesty, when someone let their guard down and showed the parts of themselves they usually kept hidden. He sighed, a deep, heavy sound, and admitted he had been dealing with a lot lately, work stress, lingering doubts about his relationships, and the constant feeling that he was drifting, unanchored, and Emily felt a pang of recognition, because she too had known those nights when the world seemed too loud, too complicated, and all you wanted was a quiet space and someone who understood without judging, and now, sitting across from him, she realized that maybe this was the moment they both needed. A pause in the chaos, a small oasis of empathy and connection. Conversation started slowly, then picked up as she asked about his week, teasing lightly, making him laugh, and for a moment, the tension lifted, replaced by the soft warmth of shared humor, the kind that makes you feel close without needing anything else, and Emily noticed how his eyes sparkled faintly in the lamp's glow, how the awkwardness softened with each smile, how the human beneath the polished exterior emerged in small, honest fragments. He began to open up more, talking about childhood memories, his hopes, his fears, and Emily listened intently, realizing she had always liked him, but never imagined she could feel this intimate understanding so quickly. as though years of polite interactions had led them to this exact moment, where vulnerability was shared freely, creating a subtle bond neither had anticipated but both secretly craved. Her hand brushed his again accidentally as she reached for a pillow, and neither pulled away this time. Instead, the small contact lingered, electric and soft, the kind of touch that says more than words, and Emily felt her heart race, trying to steady herself, because the situation was complicated, unexpected, and yet profoundly human, reminding her that sometimes, the most meaningful moments arrive without warning, unplanned, and shake the foundation of what you thought was normal. He laughed quietly, almost apologetically, about his clumsiness, and she teased him gently in return, the warmth of the interaction dissolving some of the embarrassment in his eyes, allowing him to relax just a little, and in that space, Emily began to see the layers she had never noticed, the self-doubt, the longing, the desire for connection, all hidden beneath the confident smiles in the hallway, all now laid bare in her living room as the night deepened and the city outside slept. Liam's stories shifted to softer confessions, things he hadn't shared with anyone else, and Emily felt a strange intimacy bloom, the kind that comes from witnessing another person's truth without judgment, the kind that makes you feel closer than words can capture, and she realized she had never felt this way about anyone. Not in a moment so raw and unfiltered. Hours passed almost unnoticed. The lamp's warm light created shadows that danced across the walls, and the occasional sound from the street below reminded them that the world continued outside their small bubble, yet neither moved to close the distance entirely, because the tension was unspoken but undeniable, a subtle mix of comfort, attraction, and care, like two people standing at the edge of a precipice, unsure if they would leap but tempted by what lay beyond. Liam's voice softened, confessions spilling out about loneliness, past mistakes, and the strange way life sometimes isolates people even when surrounded by others, and Emily's heart ached with empathy, wanting to offer something more than words, a gesture, a reassurance, a quiet presence that said, "You are not alone, not tonight, not here," and in that simple act, she realized that she was more drawn to him than she had expected, the kind of connection that made your chest tighten, your mind spin, and your heart hope, all at the same time. He paused, looking at her with eyes that were unsteady but honest, and she met them, holding his gaze without fear, without judgment, letting him feel that in her presence, he could be real, imperfect, and still accepted, and in that silent understanding, the apartment transformed into a space of trust, warmth, and possibility, a place where the night felt alive with quiet intimacy and unspoken feelings. She noticed the subtle details, how his hair fell slightly over his forehead, the faint tremble in his hands as he set the empty glass down, the way he exhaled when he realized she wasn't judging him, and all of it made him more human, more captivating, more endearing, and Emily felt an unexpected surge of tenderness, a desire to protect, to comfort, and perhaps, to be closer than friendship had ever allowed. Time stretched, yet every moment was charged, the simple act of being together in the quiet apartment amplifying feelings neither had fully acknowledged, and Emily realized that her perception of him had shifted completely. He was no longer just the friendly neighbor. He was someone layered, vulnerable, complex, and achingly real. Someone who had let her witness a part of him that few ever saw, and in that, she felt a strange, beautiful gravity pulling her toward him. The night deepened, the city's lights dimmed, and yet inside her apartment, something bright and tentative glimmered between them, unspoken but felt deeply, a connection that was soft, emotional, and thrilling in its quiet intensity, leaving Emily wondering where this night would lead, knowing that whatever happened next, nothing would feel ordinary again, because in letting Liam into her space, she had also let him into her heart in ways she hadn't expected, and as she watched him finally settle, exhausted but calmer, she realized that this night, strange, unexpected, and intimate, was only the beginning of something neither of them could ignore, a slow, growing tension that whispered of possibility, of closeness, of the kind of bond that changes people, quietly, profoundly, and forever. The room felt smaller, warmer somehow, as Emily sat closer to Liam on the couch, the soft light from the lamp casting a gentle glow on his face, and she noticed the way his eyes met hers. Occasionally, flickering with emotions he couldn't fully name, a mixture of embarrassment, longing, and something that made her chest tighten, because she could feel the intensity between them without a single word being spoken, a tension that was quiet yet electric, like the moment right before a storm breaks, the kind that made her pulse quicken and her mind whirl with questions she didn't dare ask but couldn't ignore either. Liam's voice, still unsteady from the alcohol, became softer, more confessional, as he spoke about the loneliness he hadn't admitted even to his closest friends, the pressure to appear fine when everything inside him felt tangled and heavy, and Emily found herself leaning in, listening with a focus and care that surprised her, because she realized she had never felt this compelled to truly understand anyone, to hold space for them without judgment, to simply be present and let them exist fully, fragile and unpolished, and in doing so, she could see the man she had always liked but never really known. His hand brushed against hers accidentally as he reached for the glass of water again, and neither pulled away. Instead, there was a pause, a shared breath, a moment of awareness that lingered longer than necessary, making her heart race and her thoughts scatter with possibilities she hadn't dared to imagine, because the subtle contact carried weight, the kind that hints at feelings buried under years of friendship and polite interactions. And Emily felt a warmth spread through her chest, one that made her stomach flutter and her mind whisper that perhaps this night wasn't just about comforting a neighbor, it was about opening herself to something new, something delicate and potentially life-changing. He laughed quietly at a joke she made, the sound a mixture of relief and nervousness, and she felt drawn to him even more, noticing the way his eyes softened when he looked at her, the faint blush creeping across his cheeks that made him human, vulnerable, and infinitely captivating, the kind of sight that makes your chest ache with affection and desire simultaneously, without the need for grand gestures or declarations. Liam's words began to take a bolder turn, and he admitted feelings he had held back for years, confessing that he had always been drawn to her, always noticed the little things, the way she smiled at small joys, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about things she loved, the quiet kindness she offered to everyone around her, and Emily felt a rush of emotion, realizing she had felt the same pull, had recognized the same sparks, but had never dared to acknowledge them, and now, in the glow of their mutual vulnerability, the tension between them was no longer subtle but undeniable, a delicate thread that connected their hearts even as fear and uncertainty lingered. She reached out, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, then moved slightly closer, testing the boundaries of their newfound intimacy, and Liam's eyes followed her, dark and searching, his breath slightly uneven, as though he were aware that each small movement carried meaning far beyond its physical weight, that in the silence, in the tiny gestures, they were communicating feelings words could not fully capture, and Emily felt the thrill of this silent language, a conversation of hearts that had waited years to begin. They talked about their dreams, their regrets, their moments of weakness, and Emily noticed how easy it was to be honest with him, how safe it felt to share pieces of herself that she usually kept private, and in the exchange, she felt a closeness that was deeper than friendship, a tender intimacy that made her pulse quicken and her thoughts spin with anticipation, because she understood that Liam felt it too, the subtle magnetism, the slow, simmering attraction that neither had acted upon. Until now, and the room seemed to shrink around them, the world outside forgotten, leaving only the soft hum of their shared space, the quiet rhythm of hearts leaning toward each other. At one point, Liam sighed, resting his head momentarily against the back of the couch, and Emily felt a pang of compassion mixed with something more, a desire to be near him, to comfort him, to let him feel that he was seen and understood, that his vulnerability was not a burden but a gift she could hold carefully, a precious window into the man he truly was, and in that, her feelings deepened, intertwining with the moment itself, the late-night intimacy, the delicate balance of care, longing, and unspoken desire. She could feel the tension building, a quiet but persistent current that pulled them closer, in the way their hands almost touched, the way their shoulders nearly brushed, the way their laughter mingled with silence, creating a rhythm that was both soothing and electric, and Emily realized that she was not afraid of the connection but exhilarated by it, because it felt honest, real, and fragile, the kind of feeling that makes you aware of every heartbeat, every breath, every glance, and the possibility of what might come if they allowed themselves to lean fully into it. Liam's voice became even more vulnerable as he admitted fears about past relationships, the heartbreaks he hadn't shared, the mistakes that had left him hesitant to trust, and Emily felt an urge to reassure him, to offer the comfort of presence, the kind that says without words, "You don't have to face this alone," and in that gesture, the emotional barrier between them began to crumble, leaving a space of intimacy that was warm, quiet, and full of potential, the kind of closeness that writers describe in novels but that feels even more real in the presence of another human being, soft and living and unguarded. As the minutes passed, their conversation deepened, shifting seamlessly from lighthearted jokes to confessions of loneliness, from past memories to fleeting hopes, and Emily felt herself drawn in completely, noticing details, the way Liam's hair fell over his forehead, the curve of his smile when he caught her gaze, the small sighs he made when talking about difficult topics. That made her feel connected to him in ways she hadn't anticipated, and with every passing moment, the attraction became undeniable, the chemistry between them growing, soft but insistent, like a slow-burning fire that demanded acknowledgement. Their hands touched briefly again, this time lingering just a fraction longer, and neither pulled away, both aware of the unspoken electricity in the room, aware that something was shifting, transforming, creating a space where feelings long suppressed could finally breathe, where the years of subtle glances, missed opportunities, and unspoken admiration could converge into something tangible, delicate, and beautiful. And Emily felt her heart swell with a mix of excitement, nervousness, and the warmth of shared humanity, because this connection wasn't forced or hurried. It was natural, gradual, and profoundly emotional. Liam's laugh broke the tension occasionally, light and soft, and Emily noticed how it contrasted with his earlier awkwardness, how the warmth of his personality emerged fully once the alcohol loosened his guard, and she felt grateful to witness it, realizing that this wasn't just about attraction. It was about seeing the real person behind the polite smiles, the confident demeanor, the charm, and feeling honored to be let in, to be trusted with this version of him, to be the one who could witness vulnerability without judgment. The room grew quieter as the night deepened, and yet, in the stillness, there was a hum of anticipation, a sense that they were both teetering on the edge of something meaningful, something neither could fully name yet, and Emily's heart raced with the awareness that every glance, every small gesture, every shared laugh or sigh was building toward a moment they both felt but neither wanted to rush, a delicate tension that made the air thick with possibility, soft and intimate, romantic in a way that was honest and beautiful, and in that quiet intensity, Emily realized she had never felt closer to anyone, never understood another person so fully in such a short span of time, never felt the pull of potential love mixed with trust, empathy, and a profound emotional connection that made her believe that sometimes, the heart recognizes what the mind has been too cautious to accept, and in that realization, she leaned slightly closer, and Liam met her gaze, eyes dark, searching, unafraid. Now, because in the honesty of the moment, the mutual vulnerability had created a bond neither expected but both felt, a tender, electric promise of something deeper than friendship, waiting patiently, silently, for the courage to step fully into it, just when the fragile warmth between them seemed to settle into something comforting. Liam's phone buzzed insistently on the coffee table, breaking the quiet that had wrapped around Emily's apartment like a soft blanket, and the sound startled both of them, a reminder that the outside world still existed beyond this cocoon of intimacy. Yet the interruption felt urgent, tense, because the message illuminated the screen with a name that made Liam's chest tighten, his thumb hovering over the notification as his eyes flickered with hesitation and guilt, and Emily noticed immediately that something had changed in his expression, a sudden shadow replacing the calm vulnerability that had drawn her so close just moments before. It's nothing, he muttered at first, trying to hide the momentary panic, but the way his hand trembled slightly betrayed the truth, and Emily leaned forward, curiosity mixing with concern, feeling that subtle unease she recognized from times when someone carries a weight they aren't ready to reveal, the kind of tension that makes the air feel thick, electric, and impossible to ignore. Finally, with a small, reluctant sigh, he glanced at the screen, and Emily caught a glimpse of the message, short, polite, asking for closure, from his ex-girlfriend, someone he had been entangled with years ago but had left unresolved, a reminder of past mistakes and emotional baggage he hadn't fully processed, and in that instant, the easy intimacy between them faltered, replaced by the complicated, messy reality of human relationships, the kind that doesn't respect timing or desire, and Emily felt her stomach tighten, realizing that the man she had just seen so vulnerably was being pulled back into a world that wasn't ready to let him stay in hers. Liam's face twisted with conflicted emotion, regret, guilt, longing, and something that looked like fear, and he murmured, "I can't. I shouldn't. I need to figure this out," words spilling out in a jumble, rushed and halting, and Emily's heart ached because she understood, even in this moment of emotional revelation, how complicated life could be, how past choices could reach into the present and unsettle even the most tender of connections. She reached out instinctively, her hand brushing his arm, the gesture gentle, grounding, and unspoken, a quiet reassurance that she was still there, still willing to wait, still seeing him for who he truly was beneath the complications, and Liam's eyes softened at her touch, grateful yet torn, aware that he had feelings for her that now clashed with unresolved threads of his past, creating a tension that neither had anticipated but both had to navigate. "Emily. I don't want to hurt you," he said finally, the words trembling, fragile, and heavy with meaning, and she shook her head slightly, her voice soft but firm. "I'm not asking you to have all the answers right now, Liam. I just want to be here, with you, in this moment," because she understood that love and connection were messy, that timing was rarely perfect, and that sometimes the most profound acts of care were not grand gestures but presence, patience, and the courage to hold space for someone else's humanity, even when it conflicted with your desires. He nodded slowly, swallowing hard, his gaze flicking between her face and the phone, torn between responsibility, lingering attachments, and the undeniable pull toward her, and Emily felt her heart squeeze with both longing and empathy, realizing that emotional intimacy often came with challenges, with moments of hesitation, with decisions that could break or build the fragile trust forming between two people, and yet she remained patient, letting him process, letting him breathe, letting him wrestle with the shadows of his past while remaining physically and emotionally present, a steadfast anchor in the storm of his feelings. For several long minutes, the silence stretched, broken only by the faint hum of the city outside and the occasional sigh from Liam, and Emily noticed how tense his jaw was, how his hands fidgeted slightly, how every fiber of him seemed caught between worlds, pulled by the gravity of history and the soft, growing connection they had nurtured, and in that observation, she felt a deeper understanding of him, a profound compassion that made her heart ache with love and hope simultaneously, the kind of emotional resonance that only comes when you witness someone in their full complexity and still choose to care. Finally, he put the phone down, almost tentatively, and turned toward her, eyes wet with unshed tears, and whispered, I don't know what to do. But I know I don't want to lose this moment with you," and Emily felt a shiver of both fear and excitement, because those words, imperfect and hesitant though they were, carried the weight of truth, the recognition of feelings, and the courage to acknowledge them despite obstacles, and she knew that this was a turning point, a juncture where they could either retreat into uncertainty or lean into the fragile, powerful connection they had found. She reached out, placing her hand over his, warm and reassuring, and he didn't pull away, letting the contact ground him, let it anchor him in the present, the here and now, a moment that was theirs alone, filled with unspoken understanding, subtle longing, and a tentative hope that maybe, despite the messiness of life, they could navigate towards something meaningful together. They talked quietly then, not about the ex, not about the past, but about small things, the way the city looked at night, the little moments in their day that brought them joy, the comfort of mundane routines. And in that conversation, Emily felt the tension ease slightly, the thread of possibility reweaving itself, delicate yet strong, a bond that was tested but not broken, and in those hours, she realized that love, connection, and trust were not linear, not neat, but often raw, unpredictable, and beautiful precisely because of the challenges it contained. Liam finally exhaled, leaning back slightly, a small, tentative smile breaking through the storm in his expression, and Emily mirrored it, offering warmth, patience, and silent encouragement, because she understood that emotional growth and vulnerability required both courage and time, and that what they had tonight, messy as it was, mattered far more than perfection or clarity. The city outside grew quieter, the hum of traffic distant, and the apartment became their sanctuary, a space where mistakes, regrets, and lingering doubts could coexist with hope, attraction, and tender care, a place where they could begin to understand one another in a real, human way, and Emily felt her heart swell with both anticipation and empathy, knowing that the journey ahead would not be simple, but that it could be worth it if they approached it with honesty, patience, and mutual respect. Liam's gaze lingered on her, filled with gratitude, longing, and a quiet awe at the patience and care she offered, and Emily felt a flutter in her chest, aware that she too was opening herself, risking disappointment but embracing the possibility of connection, and in that shared, unspoken understanding, they both sensed that something significant had begun, a slow-burning emotional bond that could survive the twists and complications of life if they nurtured it carefully, honestly, and tenderly, and as the night deepened, they remained close, hand in hand, hearts aligned in quiet resonance, each drawing strength from the other, each realizing that sometimes the most profound love begins not with perfection but with the courage to be present, to wait, and to see someone fully, even when the world intrudes with its complications, and in that fragile, beautiful moment, Emily and Liam found themselves suspended in a space of tentative trust, delicate hope, and growing, undeniable emotional intimacy that promised more than either had expected, a connection that was as messy as it was real, as human as it was romantic, and as deeply moving as it was quietly electrifying, leaving both of them wondering, with hearts racing, what tomorrow might bring, and whether the fragile beginnings of love they felt tonight could survive the tests and twists of life outside her apartment walls.